One of my dear friends, who's been part of Ananda for a decade or more, always lived a little bit sort of their own life, even in the context of participating from time to time in Ananda. And not everyone finds meditation easy. So this man, even though deeply devoted, spent quite a long time before finally making the decision to take Kriya, to get himself organized enough to meditate enough, to want to do it, and to resolve the kind of inner conflicts that people sometimes have about the spiritual path. I remember another friend from 25 or 30 years ago. The woman got to the point where she was about to take Kriya, but she wanted to be married, and she was a single person. She hoped to be married, and she was a single person. She started running the statistics and decided that becoming a Kriyaban would narrow her options even more. And no amount of persuasion, Swami Kriyananda has pointed out, there is no such thing as statistics. There is only individual karma. It's not a matter of what the statistical probabilities are. Your own will surely come to you, and no effort to either attract or prevent that which doesn't belong to you will never reach you one way or another. She never did, as far as I know, either marry or take Kriya, but I'm not sure. But I'm not frankly certain of either of those facts. But this friend finally got himself organized to take Kriya, and wrote that, meditation had never been more attractive. Whereas before there was no time in the day to meditate, now he was finding that there was morning and night, somehow space that was never there was suddenly there. And then after a few months, a couple of karmic nuclear bombs went off. Really big bombs, not little bombs, that just sort of blew a lot of comfortable expectations completely out of the water. Remains to be seen whether it's forever or not. And the natural thought, which I actually hear people say sometime, is that the difficulties were caused by taking Kriya, because now I've stirred up all this karma or whatever it is. Whenever I hear people talk like that, I do the Desdemona on them, which is to try to smother them with a pillow and make them stop doing that. Desdemona was smothered by Othello in Shakespeare's play. And just to try to get that thought out of people's minds. But the suffering that poor devotee was going through was very, very real, so there was no simple answer. And I've reflected on it a great deal because it's exactly pertinent to Easter. It couldn't be a more perfect season to be thinking about these things. And it was interesting as I reflected on it, and I'm telling this story, which happened to one person, but the experience is so universal, the details don't make any difference, doesn't matter whose story it is. We all run these same thoughts. And the idea, I realized, was not merely the fear that the difficulty was caused by Kriya, but in a very real sense, the hope that it was caused by Kriya. Because then all we have to do is stop doing Kriya, and everything gets better again. I mean, the reason follows feeling, and desire and fear are very strong feelings, and they can really confuse clarity of mind. So I had to stand back and really try to think, well, the probability is that this was in your horoscope when you were born, and if an astrologer who was wise enough could see it, he would see that it was coming. And karmic bombs do not build up in a matter of months. They're sort of being woven into the fabric of your being for a long time. And with all due respect, doing 14 Kriyas morning and night for a couple of months is probably not enough to change your destiny. I like to say that it would be, but it probably isn't. But what it really is all about is exactly really what the story is about tonight, which is, why are we devotees? What is this relationship that we have with God? As we progress through the stages of development that are represented by the 4 castes, the second stage of development is called the Vaishya. And that is represented by the idea of a merchant. Not all merchants are Vaishyas, but the idea of a merchant is very simple. I give you value, you give me something back. And it's very hard, especially at the beginning of our spiritual life, not to think of this as some kind of a bargain. I'm going to give up these things, I'm going to trust you in this way, I'm going to put out this effort, and then consciously or subconsciously we think, and then you're going to give me something. Now, the way to understand our relationship with God is not necessarily to go to realms that we cannot comprehend from our own experience, but in an odd sort of way to bring it just the opposite. To think about what we really do know, our actual experience of love, and what works and what doesn't work. Now think about the relationships you may have had or have observed in which it's a bargain. Well, you weren't nice to me yesterday, so I'm going to be mean to you today. That's just the way it goes. You didn't take out the garbage, so I'm not going to fix your dinner. Like that. You spoke meanly to me, I can double it. You insulted me, I can insult you. I was counseling this couple who were struggling in their marriage, and at a certain point in the conversation, he just told me something really horrible that she had said to him. And then, of course, she had to tell me the really horrible thing he said to her, and both were just really god-awful. And it was beginning to escalate again, and I just sort of stepped in and I said, look, I'm the referee here. I declare it even. We're going back to 0 now at this point. Because love that's based on weighing and measuring and is always in jeopardy if the bargain is broken anywhere, is that love, really? Or is that just self-interest? Now, think for a minute if God loved us that way. On Saturday night we had a Kriya here. I vow to practice Kriya regularly and faithfully as it is taught to me. And then each person walked up and said, I will. Very sacred moment. Now, I know there are people who have practiced Kriya every single morning and every night of their lives. I refuse to incriminate myself by saying whether I'm in that group or not. But how many times do we promise to be good in this way, to be good in that way? And promise God, no less. And then, well, not this morning. I'm a little tired. I'm a little mean. I was justified. What if God had such a bargain with us? Once, Swamiji was a little annoyed with a certain disciple because he kept promising to meet with Swamiji to learn the techniques as Master wanted him to. And he was always sort of so sincere, so enthusiastic when he was around Master, but when it really came time to follow up with Swamiji, he never did. And so Swami was just a little miffed with him. And the man came to visit Master, and Master invited Swamiji to serve his lunch, as he often did. And Swamiji just remained very aloof from the devotee. And afterwards, Master said, when they were alone, Master says, you were awfully cold with him. And Swamiji said, well, I don't believe in his sincerity. He's all smiles when he's with you, and then he makes appointments with me again and again and never even shows up. Master said, oh, I wonder how all of you would have gotten along if I treated you so coldly. And Swami felt duly reprimanded, and appropriately so. If God was cold to us merely because we failed to live up to our side of the bargain, just imagine where we would be. What I have observed in people's lives, and I say this with deep sincerity, and please listen to me, it's perhaps one of the most important aspects of the path that I know. When things go wrong, cling ever more fiercely to God. Don't ever imagine, even for a moment, that you will find comfort by turning your back. Don't make it a bargain. Oh, I've done all my kriyas, life isn't better. Now I will go, excuse me, where? And what do you think you will find when you get there? You know, our only hope is to cling to God in such a moment as Peter answered Jesus at the end of Jesus' life when he was making it very difficult for his disciples and many were leaving. He said to Peter, will you also leave me? You know, Peter had this interesting karma with Jesus. Will you also leave me? Peter answered words that you should emblazon on your heart. Lord, where would I go? Swamiji said once that one of the things that determines whether you succeed on the spiritual path is whether you recognize that sticking to the spiritual path with every ounce of energy we can muster, no matter how feeble or astounding that energy is a matter of life or death. It's not a matter of convenience. It's not a matter of, well, it would be nice. It's a matter of life or death. And the death that we experience is suffering without any understanding of why or any hope of redemption, because what can lift us beyond it if we have turned our backs on God? And what I have seen through the years is that hard times come to everyone. Dear friends, we have so much karma that we've set in motion that now has to be lived through. We cannot come onto the path because we think somehow this is going to be an easy ride. You know, it will be what it's going to be. Karma has to be played out. But as Swamiji said, once we become devotees, at least we know where we're going. And we understand that bliss is the end of this path and that God is always with us. But I've seen when hard times come, people often take one of two rather polarized positions. They either cling ever more fiercely to Sangha, to the company of devotees, to the practices, to the friendships, to the community, or they try to withdraw into themselves, think they can run it by themselves, and just go off and hide in a hole. I've never seen the latter work. I mean, one most astonishing incident that I witnessed was so strange. One person behaved very, very, very badly and suffered enormous public humiliation from extremely wrong actions. And another person was the victim of those wrong actions. So one was guilty in a sense and one was innocent. The innocent person decided to solve the problem by getting really tight within themselves. And instead of walking through the horror of it hand in hand with gurubhais, they got smaller and smaller and more withdrawn and eventually simply faded away from the spiritual family. The other, whose path you think would have been much more difficult, decided, I've never been in so much trouble. I've never needed God and my friends more. And that person has thrived. You know, God sends us these tests to see how much we love, how much we trust, how much faith we have, and whether or not we're just in it for the good times. You know, when you marry someone, better or worse, life or death, you know, sickness or health, all of those promises, and that's just one incarnation. You know, you think it's not the same when you promise the Guru? And now, because we're talking about the most, you know, extraordinary example of loyalty to God in the face of the impossible, we have the story of Jesus. You know, and listening to the words from the Bible that David was reading, you know, illustrated by the sound of that music, Jesus was there, falsely accused, turned on by those who should have been his own people, betrayed even by Peter. And even before Peter's denial of him 3 times, they're having dinner together, which has become known as the Last Supper, and Jesus is talking about going to a place where they can't go with him. He's referencing the fact that he knows within a few hours he's going to be gone. The disciples don't know that. Peter, who's always was blustering so, Anywhere you go, Lord, I'll go with you. I'll die for you. Oh, Jesus says. Oh. And then he says to Peter, before dawn comes, before the rooster crows to signal the rising of the sun, 3 times you will say that you didn't even know me. And he did. You know, in the fear of the moment. In the fear of the moment, Jesus has been arrested. Oh, there's this drunken mob. There are all these powerful people. Jesus is being tortured, humiliated, taken away from them. None of this was expected. And Peter has snuck in to see what's going on, but nobody knows, how far this persecution is going to go and what's going to happen next. And people say, wait a minute, weren't you with that guy? No. Probably the words come out of your mouth before you even think about it. No, I didn't even know him. Just a few hours before, oh, I would die for you, Lord. Anywhere you go, I'll go. Why do you think these stories are in here? Because this is us. These souls live these lives and these stories are preserved so that we will know. 3 times that happened. And after the last time, even as Peter was saying for the 3rd time, then there was the sound of the rooster crowing. And the dawn had come. And all of a sudden, Peter realized. Because it doesn't matter how far we fall. It doesn't matter what kind of mistakes we make. God's love for us is not conditional. And Jesus had told him even before, in essence, he forgave him before he sinned. But in that moment, Peter realized, and as the Bible says, he rushed out of the room and wept bitterly. But then he came back. And that's really all that mattered. He came back. And then Jesus himself, we think, well, he was a master, but still, he never wavered. And you hear the courage in what was said to him. He's standing there and the high priest is interrogating him and he answers in such a strong and forceful way that somebody hits him for giving the wrong answer. And Jesus just turns and says, what was wrong with what I said? If you can't really tell me what was wrong, then why are you hitting me? Just imagine it for real. He's been chained, he's helpless. These people can do anything they want with him. The mob is outside, his disciples are gone. And somebody hits him in the face and he said, give me a good reason or stop hitting me. This is courage and faith and dedication to the ideal and absolute fearlessness. And that's why the story lives on and on and on. And then you have the other drama, which is the disciples and how are they dealing with this. And very few of them had the courage to be at the foot of the cross because, Peter didn't even want to be identified with him. Their own lives were at stake, they thought. They didn't know. But they hadn't exactly lost faith, but they just didn't know what to do. But after Jesus died, they gathered together in his name. So even though everything seemed to have collapsed around them and all their expectations of just a few days earlier, when they gloriously entered the city of Jerusalem and all the city was cheering and they were the disciples of the acclaimed King of the Jews. Just what a ride. You really find out what you're made of. And they waffled. They ran away when he was arrested. In one of the Gospels, it talks about how when the disciples were running away in the garden after he was arrested, and one of the guards grabbed at the garment of one of the disciples, and he slipped out of his garment and ran away naked. Nobody stood next to Jesus, as Peter claimed he would, and said, wherever he's going, I go. They ran away. They said they didn't know him. They crept around and were afraid to be seen as supporting him when he was dying. Many bad things happened to them. But in the end, they all came back. And in the time of difficulty, they returned and clung to each other and held fast to what they knew to be true. And Jesus appeared in the midst of them. And each one went on to the glory of the Spirit that was destined for them if they simply persevered against all obstacles. The story of Easter is the crucifixion because it leads to the resurrection. And so my dear friend, which I started telling you about just so I can finish that story, after a couple of days, came and said simply, I've loved God my whole life. I don't know what's going on, but I can't stop now. Where would I go, Lord? Just ask yourself every time it even crosses your mind that there's an easier path than the path of giving your whole heart, mind, and soul to God. Where would I go? And what would I find there? I am yours, Lord. What is the first commandment? Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength. Your chosen people have always been those of every path, denomination, background, character, strength, or weakness. God chooses those who choose him. Let us wholeheartedly choose him. God bless you.